The bridge we're dealing with is technically known as a deck steel truss. It means it has three parts to it, three elements. A deck, a superstructure, and a substructure. The deck is made of a concrete rebar type of material. The superstructure is made of steel, and the substructure is made of steel and concrete footings. We're going to be looking at past the construction project of this and looking at designs, any type of modifications that have been made during this 40-year history of this bridge. And we're also looking for any type of alterations. We're getting the maintenance records. Right now we already have the maintenance records and the inspection records. Let me clarify that. The inspection records that come from the National Bridge Inspection Program from 2000 to 2007. We're asking for 10 previous years, and we may even go back further than that to try to understand the condition of this bridge. We're going to be examining the concrete, steel, and if it in fact had failed at any time. We're even going back to find out, and we're going to be talking to the Coast Guard about any possibility of a strike from any type of a vessel. Coast Guard would be able to give us any type of data should that have happened over the 40-year history of this bridge. We are also coordinating, and we're getting tremendous cooperation from the Minnesota Department of Transportation, along with the Federal Highway Administration. Right now, things that are going on are what we would call the documentation phase of our investigation. Some of that is being done by our own investigators, some is being done by the state police, and some is going to be done by the evidence recovery team of the FBI. They're going to be assisting us in creating what we call the documented picture of where the bridge actually, what it looks like, so that we can bring this back and create the appropriate computer model. And I'll explain why this is extremely important to us, because we will use this device called a laser transit survey. It's called a total station. That's really the device. It really is a survey device which will give us accurate points on every edge of that bridge structure, and the elements from the superstructure to the footing base. All of the elements that we're interested in will be mapped out by the total station. We'll be taking that back to Washington, putting it on our computer, and then working with a device, an actual computer program which deals in failure analysis. And this is an interesting program because the FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, actually has given us this program. And this program was actually created by one of their employees while they were going to school at the University of Minnesota. And this program is basically a program that will help us understand. Simply stated, when we put this program into the computer and also use it along with our laser transit survey, what we will be able to do is take parts of the bridge, the parts of the bridge structure away, until the bridge actually falls down to create the actual scene that we have now. When we do this through the computer model, it will speed up the process of understanding which one of the components, which one of the elements failed. And that's going to help us a great deal. That probably this program, along with the video, is going to probably improve the ability for the NTSB to get the facts, to do its analysis by months. So we're very, very pleased of The video that we're able to get today, we're going to send it back to Washington to get it enhanced. And we're also going to be using this program later to be able to do this failure analysis, take apart every one of the elements, see which one creates that picture that we now know as the result of this failure. I'll take a few questions after I'm finished with the opening statement, if it's okay. We're also getting the ratings, the various ratings that we got from the FHWA's National Bridge Inspection Program of this particular bridge. We have gotten from Minnesota DOT the we are at this moment, we are creating our investigation teams, and they will include 5 working groups. First, the human factors group will be interviewing those men and women that were actually working on the bridge, trying to understand exactly what they were doing, the roles and the missions that they had in trying to make the bridge better. We're also going to be looking at the design. We have a design group to see if this design was an adequate design. A construction group to see if the materials and the process under which this bridge was constructed was appropriate. A human performance group, and that's going to be a group that's dealing with how the people did their jobs. And finally, the survival factors. Survival factors will really be dealing mostly with why some vehicles survived, one and others didn't. We'll be understanding that from these 5 groups. Now, before I take any questions, I want to thank the witnesses that have already called the NTSB providing information. But I want to give a telephone number that I would hope that...
Wonderfully. From the time that the call went out to the time that the last patient was transported to the scene was less than 2 hours.
A practice system working along with strangers, creating a working system of their own.
The citizens played a huge part in this. Citizens were pulling people from cars that could be pulled from cars.
Stories continue to come in all day. At last word, 5 people are still here in critical condition, 10 in stable condition, and 12 people have gone home. Reporting live at Hennepin County Medical Center, Allison Trier, Say 5 Eyewitness News.
All right, thanks, Allison.
Once again, the 4 people who have been identified as victims of this bridge collapse, we have their names, where they're from. We want to show that to you right now. Julia Blackhawk, 32 years old, from Savage. Patrick Holmes, 36 years old, from Mounds View.
Artemia Trinidad Mania, 29 years old, from Minneapolis. And Sherry Engelbretson, 60 years old, from Shoreview. You met her husband and her daughter earlier today. We talked with them about their hopes, their failing hopes to find their mother and wife alive.
In less than a minute, we're going to go to World News. Charles Gibson is here in the Twin Cities with his crew to cover this story. We're going to watch the first part of World News with you as they cover the bridge collapse. In the meantime, we know President Bush will be here on Saturday to visit. 4 people dead, 79 hurt, up to 30 people missing somewhere in the rubble in the Mississippi River.
The recovery efforts briefly put on hold as they try to navigate some very difficult waters right now in the Mississippi River. But we are returning here in a matter of minutes here and get back to our local coverage. But right now we would like you to join with us, World News Tonight, and Charles Gibson from here in the Twin Cities.
Welcome to World News. Tonight from Minneapolis, and specifically right now, over the collapse of the Interstate 35W bridge that occurred last night. A tragedy that has horrified this community, but perhaps put in everyone's mind the question, is the bridge I drive over every day stable? The number of dead from this tragedy will be rising in the hours and days ahead because authorities know there are dead bodies in the cars still on the bridge and in the water.
From ABC News, this is a special edition of World News with Charles Gibson. Disaster on the river. Reporting tonight from Minneapolis.
Good evening. The sheriff of Hennepin County said all signs are it was a collapse. There is no sign of someone doing this. And one of the senators from Minnesota said, a bridge in America should not just fall down. We're over the collapse of the 35W bridge right now, and when you look at it, it looks almost benign, sitting there so peacefully, but it was anything but peaceful last night. There are divers in the water right now. They have tracked by sonar where the cars that went into the water are located, but the divers can only get to about 4 of them right now. It is still so unstable around the bridge itself that they dare not go any closer. And they have seen that in the cars that still sit on the bridge, there are dead bodies, but they cannot get at them yet because, again, the bridge is too unstable. There was no sign that this bridge might have been in trouble. People were going about their normal business last night, commuting to and from the city of Minneapolis, to and from St. Paul, headed for the ball game, going to the Guthrie Theater for a performance. The bridge had been rated as structurally deficient a couple of years ago in a federal examination, but there's nothing unusual about that. Indeed, 3% of the bridges in Minnesota are said to be structurally deficient, and Minnesota is on the low side compared to other states around the country. So it was a bridge that had caused some concern, but no one thought that indeed this was a dangerous bridge. There was construction underway last night. That has been mentioned many times. There was a resurfacing project underway. Obviously, whether that might have been contributory, something that will be investigated in the months and days ahead. There were 18 construction workers on the bridge as it went down, one of them missing. The amazing thing is, experts will tell you that a 64-foot fall, and that's how far the center span came down, should be fatal. But so many people survived the fall. That's one of the miracles, the good side of all of this. We will cover all of this tonight, and we're going to start with the latest, and ABC's Dan Harris, who is here in Minneapolis.
Charlie, good evening. As we go on the air tonight, here are the latest numbers. As many as 30 people are missing, 79 people injured, and 4 confirmed dead. But officials tell us that that last number, the number of dead, is very likely to grow. On this bright, cloudless day, recovery workers have been doing depressing, dangerous work, searching for bodies. The chief of police said he was quite certain they would find more victims, people trapped under the water, and also people they had seen above the ground last night, people they could not reach, but whose final messages to their family they could hear.
People that were pinned, people that were partly crushed, that were told emergency workers to say hello, say goodbye. So it was amazing, amazing scene.
These are horrible images, but within each of those images is a story. That car you see tangled in the wreckage is someone's cousin or brother or husband. Thank God this wasn't worse.
The recovery effort going on today is dangerous for 2 reasons. First, underwater, there are very strong currents in the Mississippi River that could carry the divers away. Second, above ground, those huge slabs of concrete are incredibly unstable. So crews are proceeding cautiously, but they know there are dozens of families enduring agonizing waits for information. Ron and Jessica Engebretson have been searching for wife and mother Sherry Engebretson, who they fear took an unlucky alternate route home from work yesterday.
We kept calling her cell phone constantly and just trying to get a hold of her, and nothing.
She's a fighter. My wife's a fighter, and she will do everything she can to work herself out of a situation.
This ordeal began yesterday evening. At 6:05, the first 911 call after the bottom quite literally dropped out of the 35W bridge in a stomach-churning, panic-inducing few moments. The steel cracked, the concrete crumbled. Melissa Hughes was on her way home from work to see her 3-month-old baby.
I remember just stomping on the brake and grabbing the steering wheel, and then I heard a loud crash, and I looked up in my rearview mirror, and my back window was totally smashed.
By 6:15, first responders arrived to find dozens of people stranded, including a school bus filled with children. By 6:40, Melissa Hughes, who walked away unscathed, was tearfully reunited at the scene with her daughter, Olivia.
I was just thankful to be there.
Because you almost weren't.
At 6:30 this morning, Melissa Hughes returned to the scene, pointing out her red car in the wreckage.
That right there is you.
Yes, with the pickup truck upside down on top of it. It's really surreal. It doesn't seem real to me.
One more note on the underwater search tonight. While the divers have not been able to get close enough to those submerged cars to actually recover more bodies, they have been able to get close enough to get vehicle license plate numbers, and they hope to use those numbers to track down the owners of the cars, Charlie. And as you know, the people who are running this rescue effort say this may be slow, but it has to be slow because they cannot sacrifice safety.
Dan Harris reporting here in Minneapolis tonight, and we are back on ground. Our tour in the helicopter was just a short time ago, and as you can see, we are right in front of what is left of the 35W bridge. Well, a young University of Minnesota student was driving me around Minneapolis this afternoon. As we stalled in traffic on the city bridge, she said to me, "You know, I feel a bit nervous sitting here." It is doubtful she'd have given it a second thought before last night. The bridge that collapsed carried millions of cars for 40 years. This is what it looked like before last night, and no one gave crossing it a thought. Interesting to compare the picture before with the picture now. ABC's Lisa Stark is following the investigation into what actually happened.
Well, Charlie, the National Transportation Safety Board says it is off to a very good start. It says having video of the actual collapse is extremely helpful. The board likened it to having a cockpit voice recorder and a flight data recorder after an airplane accident. To help figure out what tore the bridge apart, the National Transportation Safety Board will essentially put it back together, taking shattered pieces and laying them out like a puzzle.
We're going to be looking at the bolts. We're going to be looking at the girders themselves. We're going to be looking at the materials. We're going to be looking at the rebar. We're going to be looking at the cement. We're going to be looking at the plans. We're going to be looking at the maintenance records. We're going to be looking at the inspection records.
2 lanes in both directions were closed for construction. The project included resurfacing the concrete deck, replacing lights and guardrails, and work on the bridge joints. A state inspector was keeping watch and was injured when the bridge gave way. Structural engineers who watched video of the collapse say a fatigue crack is the most likely cause.
The video distinctively shows the bottom beam cracking and the upper beam cracking, and then the rest of the bridge proceeds.
The 40-year-old bridge has been inspected annually since 1993. Those inspections have turned up corrosion and fatigue cracks, which were repaired. Some fatigue cracks in welds remain, but an inspection just this year showed they had not appeared to spread.
The results of that inspection were that no growth in any of the pre-existing weld cracks were found.
A study just completed this year laid out 2 options to ensure continued safety of the bridge: adding steel plates to critical parts of the structure or thoroughly inspecting the welds. Officials chose inspection. The bridge was rated structurally deficient on the federal bridge inventory, a rating it first received in 1990. It now carries a score of only 50 out of 100.
What that rating of 50 means is that the bridge should be repaired, should perhaps be considered for replacement at some point in the future. It was by no means an indication that this bridge was not safe.
But engineers say 40 years and 141,000 vehicles a day takes a toll.
So we're kind of off the chart as far as what we would expect the steel to be able to take.
As to the cause of this tragedy, the NTSB says everything is still on the table. The age of the bridge, those fatigue cracks, the construction work, nothing has been ruled in or out. Charlie?
Lisa Stark also reporting tonight from here in Minneapolis. Well, amid the twisted jumble of steel, concrete, and cars, one image was especially chilling last night. That yellow school bus leaning precariously against a guardrail on a broken section of the bridge. About 60 people, almost all of them children, were riding in the bus when the bridge gave way, and their survival, all of them survived, is a reminder that for all the horror here, this tragedy could have been even worse. Mike Von Fremd reports on the kids.
The children ages 5 to 14 were packed 3 to a seat, singing in Spanish at the top of their lungs. They were coming home from a day at a water park when their bus began to plummet.
I was so scared because I thought we were going to crash, and then the bus burned. It was like it feels in the movie, but it was real life.
And when we went all the way down, I just saw smoke everywhere.
The sheer panic inside the bus was captured by 10-year-old Kaylee Swift, who had a cell phone and left this frantic message for her mother.
Thank God that, he was there with us, protecting us, and he didn't let us be a little bit back more, or a little bit forward more, like he had us right there in that spot.
Sasha Bouye, a counselor sitting near the back of the bus, also fears that if they had traveled just 20 feet farther, no one would have survived the fall.
It was almost like levels of falling. Boom, boom, boom. It was almost like there was layers of something, like a domino effect almost.
But were they hard jolts as they were going down?
Yeah, they were hard jolts as
In
they
other
were
words,
going
people
down.
were getting banged around.
There was kids bouncing up and down and everything.
Officials believe the bus fell more than 30 feet. The fact that it toppled like a domino helped cushion the final blow.
Tonight, 20-year-old counselor Jeremy Hernandez is credited with doing a fantastic job of evacuating the children in just minutes.
Then my heart started beating fast, and I just jumped over the seats, and I opened the back of the door, and I kicked the coolers out, and then I turned around and tried to throw kids off of the bus.
To the parents of the children, Jeremy Hernandez is a hero. That all the children survived is a miracle. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, Minneapolis.
And the question everyone is asking one another here today is, where were you last night when the bridge came down? Well, we talked to two young people today who were right there, who had very close calls. Kimberly Brown was on the bridge when it came down, and Joe Chapman was just a few seconds from jogging under the bridge when it collapsed.
I just see a huge cloud of dust just coming my way pretty much. And then I turn the corner, and then there, like 50 yards in front of me is the interstate. It's right there in front of like where I was about to run.
So what did you do when you realized that it had come down?
I quickly ran up there, and then me and this other guy been trying to see if there's anybody that needed any help. And there's a big, like a hill that goes down to the river. So like, we all went down there and helped some people get off of the bridge.
Kimberly and her friend Kelly were in a car on the bridge on their way to a soccer game.
The freeway just started buckling and waving, and we just suddenly started going down, and I pretty much closed my eyes until we landed.
What was the sound like?
At first, when I took off my headphones, and it was just complete silence. And then after about 10 seconds, I heard just a bunch of screaming and everything.
There was just a lot of noise. We heard lots of screaming. I can't really differentiate where it was and when, but there was a lot of panic.
Kimberly Brown, certainly one of the lucky ones.
It's just a miracle that I wasn't hurt more, and it's just unreal that I fell that far in a car with my friend, and neither of us were hurt. We just walked away from that.
In the Rose Garden today, President Bush promised federal help to rebuild the bridge. The president said I-35W is a lifeline of activity that must be restored as quickly as possible. And he will be here in Minneapolis to see the site for himself on Saturday. Later in the broadcast, we'll have a final note on this disaster, a book written 80 years ago that asks a critical question about what happened last night. But when we return, from bridges to dams, America's aging and deteriorating infrastructure.
We're going to take our coverage back now and keep it local after we saw about 15 minutes of the World News Report. Many of the same things we've been seeing with some additions, and what we want to do is bring you up to date on the very latest information about the victims. In the last hour, we found out the names of the victims, the 4 people who have been identified as the ones who were killed in the bridge collapse.
Julia Blackhawk, 32 years old, from Savage. Patrick Holmes, 36 years old, from Mounds View. And Artemia Trinidad Mania, 29-year-old, from Minneapolis.
And Sherry Engebretson, who's 60 years old, from Shoreview. And Sherry is a woman whose husband and daughter searched for her all day, hoped that she would turn up in a hospital somewhere. She did not. She was killed in the bridge collapse. But it speaks to the fact that there are a number of Twin Cities families who are still looking, hoping, and waiting for missing relatives to show up.
Let's go to Leah McLean. She has encountered a family who is going on what only can be described as a desperate and painful search. Leah?
Cindy, that's right. This is one family who is happy that the names you just listed does not include the name Christina Sarkorafis. Her family is looking for her today. She was on her way to church last night. She called friends, said she'd be a little late as she was coming in on 35W. Today her boyfriend talked to our Ann Hutchinson. Ann Hutchinson is out here, and Ann, the boyfriend talked to you. You said he sounded kind of desperate.
Yes, he did. I've been down at the family center that the Red Cross has set up all day, and of course you can imagine it's very somber, almost like a dream down there, as people are just waiting on the edge of hope, hoping that somebody can tell them something, anything about their missing person. Cynthia actually did dance class at a Greek church that's just off of 35W, and she had called a friend to say she was going to be late to church, and then she never showed up at church. I talked to her boyfriend. This is what he had to say.
Christina had called one of her friends saying she was stuck in traffic on the bridge and she was going to be late going to church, and she never made it to church. I frantically tried calling again and again, called other friends to see if they had seen her or talked to her. I went to the hospitals and checked, and I still haven't heard from her. I'm hoping that maybe somebody had spotted her or took her to a different hospital, a smaller hospital, and is helping her. She's a glowing person, a $1 million smile. She teaches Greek dance at St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church, and that's where she was going before the bridge accident happened. Agony, sadness, worry. I'm concerned. I don't know where she is. I can't find her.
Now, you saw the picture of Christina. If you've seen her anywhere, you're asked to call the Red Cross. If you've seen any of the missing people, you're asked to call the Red Cross. We're still going to be down with the families, asking to see if they have any more pictures of the missing and see if we can get those to you as soon as possible.
And thanks. We know there are a lot of people who have been looking for their loved ones today, and people like Ann have been down meeting with the families and saying if you want to get a picture out, if you're hoping that somehow your loved one just hasn't called yet, and maybe that they're not mixed up in everything here. There are people who are just hoping against hope that there is some other explanation. If they want to put pictures up, we are more than willing to put those pictures up for some people as well, and just try to bring some hope to people and see if they can find the ones they're missing loved ones. We know that there are more than 70 people who were injured. We know there are about 20 or 30 people who are still missing at this point, and we've seen the names of the 4 confirmed dead as well, but there are a lot of families still just hoping out here. We are live in Minneapolis. Leah and Ann Hutchinson for 5 Eyewitness News.
Leah, thanks, and thank you, Ann. Also, we've just learned now from the federal government that officials have alerted states to immediately inspect bridges similar to the Minneapolis bridge, the 35W bridge. That order has now gone out across the country. Any bridges in similar construction with the 35W bridge must be inspected.
And a handful of other states actually have already started that before we had basically the mandate from the feds. Let's go out to Mark Elbert right now. He has more on the official transportation investigation coming from both the state of Minnesota and the federal government. Mark?
And Cindy, earlier at a news conference with those state and federal transportation officials, they painted a picture of a bridge that did have significant problems, but not any problems that were thought to compromise safety. Now, in the wake of this disaster, the governor announced this afternoon 3 things that he was immediately ordering. First, inspections on 3 other bridges around the state that are very similar to the design of the Washington Avenue Bridge. Second, he is ordering an independent investigation of this disaster separate from that of the NTSB. And third, he is ordering an independent review of the state's inspection process. In other words, were the state's inspection officers and the way they go about things, were they not sufficient to catch any problem before it arose? Now, this particular bridge had been inspected every other year until 1993. That's when state officials made a significant change and decided to begin inspecting this Washington Avenue Bridge every year. Now, since 1990, that Washington Avenue Bridge was found to be structurally deficient. It had corrosion on the bearings and on the steel around the joints of the bridge, and fatigue cracks had been noticed on the approach spans. But in 2005 and 2006, inspectors wrote down in their yearly inspection that those cracks, those fatigue marks, were not growing and that they were stable. Now, those cracks, officials said today, go all the way back to 1967, when the first car drove over this 500-foot span.
There was cracks that were present in the welds, what we call the tab welds of the bridge, since the day it was built, but those were not growing, and they were stable. So for those reasons, we considered the bridge fit for service. We thought we had done all we could. Obviously, something went terribly wrong.
And that's something that went terribly wrong is not only going to be looked at by this independent investigation that the governor has now ordered, but it will also be looked at, of course, by the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. The chairman of that board was here in Minneapolis doing a briefing about 2 hours ago or so. We're going to have some of his comments and exactly where the federal investigation stands coming up a little bit later. For now, live in Minneapolis, Mark Albert, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thanks, Mark. There was work going on the 35W bridge, mostly work on the surface. They were filling some cracks and they were doing some repaving, but tonight, questions are coming in about what construction workers of Progressive Contractors Incorporated, or PCI, were doing to the bridge.
Before it collapsed, Beth Judd is tracking that angle of the story. She joins us now from the newsroom. Beth?
Yes, Cindy, first, PCI is dealing with its own trauma tonight. It did have 18 workers on that bridge doing what it calls routine resurfacing work. Well, tonight, one of those workers is missing. We looked into the company's record with OSHA over the last 10 years. Here's what we found.
In the aftermath of this disaster, Progressive Contractors, Inc., based in St. Michael, issued a statement explaining what the 18 workers were doing moments before the collapse. Tom Sloan, the vice president of the Bridge Division, says his crews were doing routine resurfacing work. They were preparing to pour the final 2 inches of concrete surface. Before they could start pouring, the bridge collapsed. We looked into the safety history of PCI and found 9 violations of the Occupational Safety and Health Act over the last 10 years, but none since 2005. Violations included things like the lack of life-saving equipment for workers on one site near water, the lack of a high-visibility warning vest on another site. But in 2004, on a project in Lakeville, inspectors noted the requirement of removing people from a hazardous area when there is evidence of a possible cave-in or failure of protective systems, although OSHA did not cite the company for a violation. No one from PCI would appear on camera saying they were concentrating on their missing coworker, but Sloan explains in his statement the problem in the collapse was a steel structure supporting a concrete deck. We did not do any work on the steel structure. We simply repaired the concrete deck by removing deteriorated concrete, patching, and resurfacing.
Now, I am told several PCI workers were injured in that collapse. The family of the missing worker has spent hours at the Red Cross shelter near the scene of the collapse waiting for word about him. Live in the newsroom, Beth Jett, 5 Eyewitness News.
Well, in events like these, we always look for something to hold on to, something that gives us hope that we're going to make it through this all.
We are leaning on some of the heroic efforts made by people out there. Our Rod Simons arrived shortly after the collapse on the south side of the bridge, and Rod is here with one of the men, the story of one of the men who rescued people. Rod?
Hi, you guys. By now, you have heard of Gary Babineau of Blaine. We talked to him moments after the collapse, and today, the former wrestler from Totino Grace, who grew up in New Brighton, is still trying to make sense of it all and happy to be alive. On this day after the bridge collapse, Gary Babineau isn't just now feeling fortunate. Gary got that.
When I was on the bridge and I actually had the full view of the whole bridge going across, and I actually saw the whole thing fall and then start falling with it, it was real right then. I couldn't believe it. It was like a movie, but right when I hit, it was real to me.
Babineau is in the intense spotlight because he was one who not only survived in his demolished rig, but he then got out to rescue kids from this bus. 60 kids coming back from Barber Beach Water Park when they were caught in the collapse.
I was hearing the screams, and I looked over, and there's this school bus. I just thought, oh my God, this is terrible. When I saw the school bus, it was just, I got to get to those kids, you know. I know that there's going to be other people, and we all need to come together and we need to help these kids. We need to get them out of there.
And he did that. But as quickly as Babineau rushed to help rescue those on the bus, his mind was racing with thoughts of his pregnant fiancée, Liz.
That's the first thing I thought about when I figured out the bridge was going down. That's the first thing that went through my mind. Oh my God, I have a baby coming in 2 weeks. You know, I can't die. Please don't let me die. It was like a prayer was just going through my mind. God, you know, I don't want to die. You know, just. Ugh.
And as he stands as close as they'll let us get to one of the collapsed spans, the whole scene is as vivid as it was just after 6 Wednesday night.
Hearing the cars screeching down the incline and falling off right next to me, and then hearing the screaming kids in the bus, that's, you know, I had an angel looking down on me, you know. 2 seconds later, and, you know, I would have been in the water, or I would have been, you know, someone was looking over me.
Well, he's still in need of some serious sleep, and he told me the highlight of his day, a pork chop lunch at his mom's house with lots of loves and hugs, and not Larry King Live, but being interviewed on Good Morning America. Back to you.
Another story that says, go and hug your kids.
That's a guy that's worth talking to after what he did for those kids on the bus, too. Let's talk about the bridge now. And physically and financially what it's going to take to rebuild the 35W bridge.
We had a major promise of some major money that came in earlier today, so let's go to Chris O'Connell in the newsroom. He can update us on some of the political moves that are being made to make this bridge whole again. Chris?
Cindy, Governor Pawlenty says rebuilding the 35W bridge will most likely take 2, possibly 3 years. But the big question tonight is not time, it's money. Today, partisan politics took a back seat from the mayor's office to the White House.
We in the federal government must respond and respond robustly to help the people there not only recover, but to make sure that lifeline of activity, that bridge gets rebuilt as quickly as possible.
But that will take money. Government officials from every level and both sides of the aisle stand side by side. The feds coming to town with money in hand.
Today, I am making an initial distribution of $5 million from the department. This money will be available today to help restore the traffic flow, to clear the debris, to set up detours, and to begin the repair work.
It was the first installment of what officials hope will be more federal funds to start the massive rebuilding. Minnesota Congressman Jim Oberstar, the head of the Transportation Committee, hoping to secure $250 million, and that is just a start.
I think it'll cost substantially more than $250 million to rebuild that bridge, and to it's not only the bridge, but it's the approaches on either side for the bridge. But we have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere, and $250 million is a starting figure.
We saw the first little bit of finger-pointing today. Congressman Oberstar actually lashing out at President Bush for only authorizing half the funds the congressman says was needed to update the nation's bridge and highway system. We'll have more on that tonight at 6 o'clock. Live in the newsroom, Chris O'Connell, 5 Eyewitness News.
All right, thanks very much for putting that all together for us, Chris. Once again, we are now just about shy of 24 hours since the event happened yesterday. The bridge collapse, I-35 crashing into the Mississippi River. We know 4 people are confirmed dead. We know that there are 79 people injured and many more still missing. Please stay with us as we continue our coverage.
5 Eyewitness News at 6 starts right now.
This is 5 Eyewitness News at 6.
The people screaming, and then it was silence.
Kept calling her cell phone constantly and just trying to get a hold of her, and nothing.
It's been 24 hours, but the shock is still raw.
We can never be prepared for something as horrendous as this.
Bumper-to-bumper traffic tossed into the Mississippi.
The minutes now stretching into hours.
It's really hard.
Feeling like an eternity for those with loved ones still missing.
We can't find my sister.
She's a fighter. My wife's a fighter.
Our coverage on the 35W bridge collapse continues tonight. Good evening, everyone. I'm Cindy Picotto.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Mason. Thanks for joining us tonight. We know the names of the 4 people who died in the bridge collapse, and here they are. 60-year-old Sherry Engebretson of Shoreview, the woman that you heard referred to in the open to our newscast. Earlier, we had talked to her husband and daughter as they had waited for word about Sherry.
Also killed 32-year-old Julia Blackhawk from Savage, 36-year-old Patrick Holmes of Mounds View, 29-year-old Artemia Trinidad Mania from Minneapolis. And while the number of victims is at 4, as many as 30 people remain missing.
79 people injured, strong currents, the debris under the water in the Mississippi River, slowing recovery efforts. In fact, putting those recovery efforts at a standstill. The divers were in for a while. Now they are out. They've been trying to reach several cars that they see in the water.
The White House says President Bush will come to Minneapolis on Saturday for a first-hand look at the damage. We also know Governor Pawlenty is ordering inspections on 3 other Minnesota bridges with a similar design to the bridge that collapsed.
Finally, we learned Minnesota Congressman Jim Oberstar presented emergency legislation today that would provide more than $250 million for rebuilding the bridge. We have a lot to cover in the next hour from now until 7 o'clock. Leah McLean starts our coverage live near the scene. Leah?
And John, I want to give you one more look. Live from the scene, we're up above 35W. I want to give you a look behind me. We've been seeing this throughout the day. It's a much quieter scene today than it was yesterday. Some emergency crews, a lot of construction crews still blocking this off. But the big story today is the families, the people who are waiting to hear from those who are missing, hoping that they're going to hear some good news, some just bracing for bad news. And Joe Mason spoke with the family earlier. He's here now as well. Joe, the Ingebretson family, we just saw that that was one of the names on the list of those who did not survive this. What's the family dealing with at this point now?
It's devastating news. All families who have missing people are hopeful for the best, but fear the worst. And for one family tonight, those fears came true.
I lost my mom. I don't know. This is the hardest thing ever.
When Jessica Engelbretson said those words earlier today, her mother, Sherry, was missing. Jessica knew the chances of her survival were slim, but she wasn't giving up. Not yet.
We just hope that God will be with her right now and just stay strong. I know she's living right now. I just know it. I just know she's really strong.
There's hope there. I mean, I have to be a realist at some point in time.
Even Ronald Engelbretson knew that he may never see his wife of 30 years alive again, but he too still had hope.
She's a fighter. My wife's a fighter, and she will do everything she can to work herself out of a situation.
Sherry wasn't supposed to be here. Ronald says she never traveled over this bridge on her way to their Shoreview home, but she was here yesterday. God may only know why, and that's who Ronald is trusting tonight.
We believe in God, and we know that God is a just person, and we hold on to that faith, whatever the outcome.
Several clergy have been called in here to help comfort the families. One priest helped out during 9/11. He is here tonight trying to bring some type of peace to these families who probably know that this will be the end result of what they'll receive long term.
And Joe, there are a lot of families who are exactly looking for comfort tonight. We spoke to another man earlier. He spoke to our Ann Hutchinson, his girlfriend, Christina Sarakofas. She was driving on 35W last night. She was on her way in to church, and she called some friends and said she'd be running a little late, that she was stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. She never showed up. Today, her family, her friends are bringing us pictures and just hoping that somehow she is among the missing and that maybe she ended up somewhere else. We spoke to her boyfriend earlier, if we want to hear what he had to say.
She's a glowing person, a $1 million smile. She teaches Greek dance at St. Mary's Greek Orthodox Church, and that's where she was going before the bridge accident happened. Agony, sadness, worry. I'm concerned. I don't know where she is. I can't find her.
Families, friends, just like this, have been at the Holiday Inn near 35W. The Red Cross is here. They're trying to help reunite families, give them some kind of information about where their loved ones may be, whether or not they are really, in fact, among those who are still in the river or not. And there are also clergy members. There are priests, there are pastors here trying to offer comfort as well. The other amazing thing that we've seen out here is the effort from volunteers. Some of the Red Cross members that I've spoken to said as soon as this happened, some of them lived downtown and heard this right away. They came out, they're already Red Cross volunteers, and they jumped into action to do anything they could. And we've heard a similar story from other people around the Twin Cities who just want to try to help in this major tragedy that has hit us right in downtown Minneapolis. Reporting live in Minneapolis, Leah McLean, 5 Eyewitness News.
4 words that echo, I can't find her.
I know, and obviously an attempt to reach out to us or anybody else who can help. That was the scene Leah McLean gave us from several stories above the Mississippi River. This is the scene from way above the Mississippi River, of
Chopper
course.
5 flying high over the bridge right now. What's left of the bridge. Bob McNaney is up there with our pilot, Ken Melchior. And Bob, tell us what you see right now.
Well, you look down and it's a very quiet scene. The barge that had the divers and their equipment nearby, again, hoping to get out there, just is pulled away, and what you're looking at basically is just stillness. And, you know, this was never going to be a day of any great promise. That was pretty clear, that everybody knew, for the most part, that the victims who were still in the rubble were probably dead. But when the sun came up today, people knew it wouldn't be a day of promise, but they were hoping it would be at least a day of some productivity, finalizing what actually happened to these people, finding these people. But again, divers never got in. We're going down the river to give you a shot of the staging area. That's where the divers have been staging throughout the day. That's the barge. Very early this morning, about 7 o'clock, we saw them start putting the first of the equipment on that barge, and then men and women were put on that barge, and it was moving forward at about 11 o'clock this morning, and everything looked as if we were on stride to perhaps recover at least some of the victims today. But as you've been hearing, the currents that have been created by the debris itself have been far too dangerous. That's what the command center looks like. That's where people are leaving from to get on the river. It is no doubt a frustrating day for law enforcement because it is such good access, easy access, if you will, to the location. But they can get just yards away from, well, their final destination, and there's just really nothing they can do. So you got to believe that these men and women are feeling a grand sense of frustration tonight. John and Cindy?
All right, thank you very much, Bob. We're going to be checking back, of course, with Bob later on in this newscast. We were also telling you exactly, pretty much, an hour ago, 24 hours ago from this point on, that the phone lines were jammed in and around the area, cell phone lines jammed as victims and onlookers tried to call for help. Well, we have one of those calls. Jessica Miles in the newsroom with the story of a young girl stuck on that school bus trying to call Mom.
Cindy, we've all seen the pictures of that school bus packed with kids sitting cockeyed, wedged between a burning semi on one side and the edge of the bridge on the other. Tonight, the frantic phone call a 10-year-old girl made to her mom just seconds after this collapse. Christine Swift hasn't heard this phone message in its entirety until now. Her panicked daughter, not knowing where she is, where to go, and simply wanting her mom, but unable to reach her.
Scary. Thankful. You know, 10 seconds later, the bus would have been in the middle of the bridge.
Kaylee was one of 50 kids returning from a youth field trip when the 35W bridge below their school bus gave way.
We're almost at the end of the bridge, and everybody just heard this cracking noise. We were all quiet, and then we all just started falling. Everybody was crying and screaming. Nobody knew what was happening. It felt like we were on a roller coaster, but my stomach didn't drop. Everybody just tumbled out their seats on top of each other in the aisle.
I just glad I acted fast.
Chaperone Jeremy Hernandez rushed into action, carrying those kids off the bus and away from the danger.
I'm glad that I was there to help them. I'm glad that somebody was there for him, because I don't know what they would have did.
Jeremy, actually, his foot was hurt. His foot was cut or broken. And he was still helping all the kids. He was helping calm them down.
Kaylee and the rest of the kids were first taken to the Red Cross.
People were on the tables, laying on the floor. People were hurting all over.
When she was finally able to see her daughter after waiting 2 hours, Christine learned Kaylee had been taken to the hospital. It was 4 hours after the collapse when the two were finally reunited.
When I saw her, I just hugged her, held on to her. I love you, kissed her, told her I loved her.
Kaylee has a sore back, but doctors say she'll be okay. Her mom says she's still in shock, thankful, but heartbroken.
So many people were on the bridge when it collapsed that a lot of people might be dead, a lot of people are hurt. And my bus was one of the lucky ones.
Those kids were indeed lucky. In all, there were 61 people on that school bus. 14 of them were taken to the hospital with injuries last night. 4 are still in the hospital, 2 adults and 2 kids. We don't know the extent of those injuries at this hour. Now, a fund has been set up for those kids to help with some medical expenses. You can go to our website, KSTP.com, for more information. Live in the newsroom, Jessica Miles, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Jessica. It has been called by our colleague Bob McNaney a grand frustration. Rescuers at the staging site along the river cannot get into the river, cannot get to the cars they know are submerged near that broken bridge because of swirling currents and huge chunks of concrete. Chris Keating has been covering the recovery effort. As it stands right now, Chris, are we still at a standstill?
Well, John, I just got done with a briefing with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office, and we have now some clarification. Late this afternoon, John, in fact, only about an hour ago, divers were able to get into the water, which is known as downstream. And there were 4 hits they had in there with the sonar earlier this afternoon. They've since been able to clear the area known as the downstream area. And specifically, they had 4 hits. One was a car involved in this accident. They got in there and they found that there were no victims inside. Another was a pickup truck unrelated to this incident, apparently been there for a very long time. The other 2 hits on sonar were simply debris, so that's a good thing. As for the victim who may have been in that car, the sheriff's officer says he doesn't know where that person is, whether they got out yesterday or whether or not they're somewhere else in the river. But as of right now, they have cleared this area. That is a good sign. Another good sign we've been given is that they want to get back on the river sometime tonight while they still have some daylight. Now, we've been talking about the area downstream this evening. The other area they haven't gotten to at all is the area upstream. We had a chance to hear from the sheriff's officers talk to us about that just moments ago.
Upstream is going to be much more difficult, much more dangerous. You can imagine the water coming from the lock and dam flowing now against the debris field. We are going to proceed very cautiously in there. It's extremely dangerous.
Extremely dangerous conditions because there is rebar and concrete all around that area and submerged cars which divers need to at least make contact with, open the doors, look inside to see if anyone or anything is in there that they need to know about. What you're looking at now are sheriff's officers emptying out a barge that went out earlier with divers and searchers. They plan on filling it back up with equipment and hopefully getting back on the river tonight to make some more headway up there. But it's a very dangerous condition, but there is some good news that the divers will be getting back into the water, they believe, tonight. John, back to you.
Okay, Chris, that's good news. They were able to get into that one area and at least clear that area, and they know what's in there now.
And as Chris mentioned, there was one car discovered without anybody inside. Perhaps that was somebody who survived, because we're starting to piece together these stories of survival.
Some people waiting more than an hour, we're told, to be rescued. Others fighting against the odds, trying to save themselves. Glenn Barber live in the newsroom with the story of a St. Paul woman who conquered one of her greatest fears in the midst of all of this mayhem. Glenn?
That's right, John. A St. Paul woman was on her way to pick up her mother when she suddenly found herself sliding down that sharply sloped bridge deck toward the Mississippi River, and her first thought was that she doesn't know how to swim. 26-year-old Thuy Vo is recovering at the University of Minnesota Medical Center, Fairview.
I'm very lucky that I just get out, make it alive, that just cuts and bruises.
Vo calls herself lucky and blessed. Her husband, Rocky, calls her a hero.
I just gotta say that my wife is very brave.
Vo slammed on the brakes, but her minivan continued to slide down the bridge. Rather than crash into the cars ahead of her, Vo turned into the Mississippi River.
Screaming, I'm yelling, say, help, help, I don't know how to swim. Help, please help me, I don't know how to swim.
Vo's minivan began filling up with water. She soon realized she had to climb through the window and into the river.
That's it, only me. So I have to do something to stay alive.
Vo says she nearly drowned, but somehow she kicked and kicked to keep her head above water. Vo managed to grab a metal bar and pull herself onto a concrete slab, where she waited over an hour for a policeman to carry her to safety.
And ever since I watched TV and I watched the news and I saw what happened, that's when it really hit me that I'm lucky to be alive.
I learned it, and she too. We learned to value our life better.
Vo suffered some cuts and bruises and some strained muscles, but she's expected to be okay. In fact, she should be released from the hospital tonight. Reporting live in the newsroom, I'm Glenn Barber, 5 Eyewitness News.
And thank you very much for that story, Glenn. Now, the Stone Arch Bridge has kind of been command central for mainly the government bodies that have assembled on the scene to start piecing out what happened.
And the National Transportation Safety Board got on the ground here late last night. They've been on the bridge all day today, and they have, we're told, Mark Albert, 2 key tools they will use to try to figure out what happened.
Absolutely, John. The National Transportation Safety Board will be the lead here in trying to find out what happened. You've seen them countless times before at airplane crashes, at other disasters. They're the ones from the federal government that come in, that have the expertise, the science, the know-how to try to recreate the disaster and figure out just what caused it. The chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board said that his team has really been in place about 15 hours, and it's so far, despite that just 15 hours here and despite the fact that there is still a recovery effort going on, that they have made good progress. They have already obtained from the state, we understand, maintenance and inspection reports going back 3 years. They intend to ask for those reports from at least the past decade. There are those 2 tools, those 2 things, John, that you mentioned, that the NTSB says will really speed up this investigation. First, it just so happens that an employee of the Federal Highway Administration was working on his PhD degree at the University of Minnesota. And as the topic for his PhD, he chose this particular bridge and did a failure analysis. What could cause that bridge, which was first opened in 1967, to fail? The NTSB says they have made contact with this person and the data could be invaluable. Second, that video that we have been seeing over and over again, that security video of this bridge collapse. The NTSB says this will be crucial. This is more reliable in some cases than witness statements. They plan to send this video to Washington, D.C. to be enhanced at their national labs. And here is the reaction from the chairman of the NTSB when he first learned of the existence of this video and why he believes it will be so important.
What we're particularly pleased about is, one, getting that video. That's the equivalent in getting a cockpit voice recorder or a flight data recorder. Without this video, we would be working kind of in the real-time blind. This is going to show us what happened in the amount of time, where it began, where this failure began. They may well have been doing everything that has been prescribed in the National Bridge Inspection Program. That may well not be enough. We may be making a recommendation that it needs to be more rigorous.
So the chairman of the NTSB saying that inspectors for the state of Minnesota could have been doing everything right, but that perhaps it was not enough, and that as a result, if the NTSB finds that, they may make recommendations on a national level to change inspection programs for bridges, for highways, for roads across the entire country for all 50 states. This disaster investigation really could have a nationwide impact, and we'll just have to see what form it takes. For now, live in Minneapolis at the briefing center, Mark Albert, 5 Eyewitness News.
And as Mark mentioned, we are actually already seeing this impact. We can tell you literally that states across the nation are taking a look at what kind of bridges they have and what condition they're in. The question being asked today, what is being done about the dangers that could be out there, and how, more importantly, can we prevent this from happening? Chris O'Connell in our newsroom now to tell us how Minnesota lawmakers are trying to answer those questions. Chris.
Cindy, first of all, Governor Pawlenty has declared a peacetime emergency in the state. He's been touring the damage all day, asking state agencies to pitch in and asking for prayers from Minnesotans.
We have witnessed a day of horror and grief and tragedy and loss and pain and burden. And again, we want to express our prayers and our thoughts to the families who've experienced a loss of a loved one or a serious injury or other trauma.
Well, Governor Tim Pawlenty ordered an immediate inspection of all Minnesota bridges with similar design structure to the 35W bridge. It could be just the beginning in making bridges across the country a lot safer. Fixing rotting roads and crumbling bridges, part of federal legislation Senator Norm Coleman introduced months ago on Capitol Hill.
Because there are bridges in America that need repair. We don't think that they're in danger of falling down, but this one has, and we have to make sure that another one doesn't.
Coleman, a Republican, along with fellow Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, standing side by side at the scene of the collapse, both hoping to get $250 million in emergency federal funds to rebuild as soon as possible, and calling for a nationwide assessment of all bridges.
A bridge in America just shouldn't fall down. And that's why we have called for this investigation.
Whatever funding will come is coming too late, according to Minnesota Congressman Jim Oberstar, who also chairs the powerful Transportation Committee. He pointed the finger at President Bush, saying Bush failed to provide enough money for bridge projects.
Still $90 billion below where we needed to be, below where his own Department of Transportation said we needed to be. This administration failed to support a robust investment in surface transportation and the funding to accompany it.
Locally, Governor Pawlenty left the door open for a special session to talk about state transportation funding. That's something he's been mulling over anyway. Pawlenty made it clear he would make the response to this collapse his highest priority. In the newsroom, Chris O'Connell, 5 Eyewitness News.
Now, we are still on the subject of roads here as we tell you about a change in the detour around the bridge collapse. This just came in late this afternoon. On 35W, the southbound right lane is now open until Stinson Avenue. That's going to open up a little bit more there. Traffic on 35W northbound, however, is still routed to Interstate 94, then over to 280. And then you go up 280, but that's been turned into a temporary interstate with stoplights turned off. One problem there, only if you're trying to get off on County Road B, Broadway Street Northeast, and Roselawn Avenue. They are closed at 280.
And we are borrowing Rusty Gatenby from our friends on 5 Eyewitness News Morning to fill us in on the evening rush hour. Rusty?
And the good news is the evening rush hour, much like the morning rush hour, a bit of a surprise. The traffic flow coming into the Twin Cities in pretty good shape throughout the afternoon and this morning. Here's Traffic Pulse mapping out the drive for you right now. 94 eastbound from 394 to 280, 45 miles per hour. That's pretty typical for this time of the evening. 94 eastbound, 35W then into St. Paul takes you just 11 minutes, moving at 45 miles per hour. But check out 35W northbound. This has been the case this morning and this afternoon. Let's go back to Traffic Pulse. We're going to show you more of this metro here, if we can. There you see speeds at 60 miles per hour. Takes you just 4 minutes. They are zipping along. In fact, there it is, the whole metro. And as we zoom on in there to the area where we had that bridge collapse, you'll see that 280, that main alternate route, that is moving along as well. Okay, now let's go back to the images, live shots from Minneapolis. There's 35W at 26. Here's that lane that's open down to Stinson, and this is for local traffic only. If you're trying to go through, they've got it blocked off, and you're not going to be able to get through. You'll have to use 280. The flow 35W at 280 in good shape, as we were showing you as we mapped it out there. And in fact, we can actually give you a shot of 280 from our Midway Skycam. And there it is, that section of 280 moving along both north and southbound. So, had a couple of fender benders on Interstate 94. We saw some slowdowns. We're still seeing a bit of a slowdown on Interstate 94, but for the most part, people seem to have found a way to avoid 35W especially, but maybe just, frankly, taking a day of vacation and staying home this afternoon.
Sitting it out, perhaps. All right, Rusty, thanks a lot. Now, also, the Metro Transit pitched in, added extra buses now with 2 more park and ride lots. From 6 to 9 tomorrow morning, extra buses run from the County Road H Park and Ride in Mounds View and Regal Cinemas. That's in Brooklyn Center. Extra buses again leave. 6 other park and rides across the Metro. Let's detail them for the viewers. Coon Rapids would be the first one. Maplewood, Blaine, Brooklyn Center, also Roseville. For more information, you can log on to KSTP.com. We have it there for you.
You know, we've been hearing a lot about people, eyewitnesses here at Eyewitness News, about what they heard, what they saw, what they felt even before the collapse, and they say now that there should have been warning signs.
We took that information to a structural engineer who told us they might be onto something. Investigative reporter Christy Peel takes us step by step through the disaster. Christy?
Well, John and Cindy, one of those people believes he may have seen not just a warning, but the actual cause.
It just made me nervous.
Michael Kranz drove across the bridge every day, heading to and from work. On his way home Wednesday, 2 hours before the collapse, he saw a tanker truck next to massive piles of sand and gravel.
Between the two piles, roughly 60 feet long, I'm just questioning whether or not that bridge in that area had been overloaded with too much material.
Now that he's seen the video of the collapse, he believes it began right where he saw all that material.
Whatever equipment or traffic you put on there is not going to affect the stresses a whole lot.
But structural engineer Ted Golumbus does believe what others witnessed just minutes before the crash should have been a warning sign.
I was stuck in traffic on the bridge, and I remember thinking that this bridge is shaking more than it normally does.
A clue something was terribly wrong. In the next half hour, the shaking grew stronger.
All of a sudden, the bridge started shaking, and I was like, you know, I lived in L.A., and I know what an earthquake was like.
Sure.
And it was just like that. It was just shaking really bad.
Seconds later, the span in the center of the bridge drops.
I'm not sure, but I think the break was inside the span.
He suspects the problems were right where it collapsed.
Somewhere inside the span, you had a sort of a kink forming, and there was a lot of dust there, and then the rest of the bridge went up, and then everything settled down.
So once the center fell, the ends buckled, folding down, collapsing onto the shores of the Mississippi. Traffic management cameras first focused on the traffic that started backing up. Within seconds, it panned over to capture the cause of the backup. You can see drivers who stopped just short of the collapse trying to get away from what they trusted was a safe bridge.
It's like a completely healthy 50-year-old person suddenly drops dead with no prior history.
Each bridge in the state has extensive records. We spent the day pouring through thousands of them. We found a few bridges with the same rating as the one that collapsed, and we found several others with even lower scores. We'll run down the safety rankings for you tonight at 10. Reporting live in the newsroom, Christy Peel, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thanks, Christy. The federal government ordered about an hour and a half ago the immediate inspection of all bridges with the same design as the 35W bridge. This comes a few hours after Governor Pawlenty issued a statewide order for bridge inspections in Minnesota. The most immediate inspections will happen in these 3 locations because these 3 bridges are similar in construction to the 35W bridge. Here they are. Highway 23 bridge over the Mississippi in St. Cloud, Highway 123 over the Kettle River in Sandstone, and Highway 243 from Minnesota, Osceola, Wisconsin over the St. Croix River. These inspections, emergency inspections as termed by the governor, will happen over the next few days.
The shudder of a collapse that is being heard around the world, media attention from across the country and across the globe. ABC News anchor Charles Gibson's in Minneapolis covering this catastrophe. One thing that's striking to all of us, including him, how complete strangers jumped in to help those stranded in the collapse. Charlie Gibson was above the scene in our Chopper 5, and he comments on the spirit of Good Samaritans.
Very struck at how sobered everyone around here is by what has happened. Ever since 2001, there has been a little bit more softness about the business of living because of what happened. It just brings home to you that when you drive through the Lincoln Tunnel, or when you go over the Golden Gate Bridge, or when you put your kid on the school bus and send them to school, or when you drive over a bridge, that it's just a little bit of an act of courage, and it brings home also the fragility of life. I don't mean to be too cosmic about this, but it really has had that effect in New York City, and I wouldn't be surprised if you find that to be true here.
Charles Gibson from World News above the scene in Chopper 5. They broadcast live about an hour ago on World News from the Twin Cities. Now, over the past 24 hours, we've seen a lot of dramatic pictures and video of the collapsed bridge. We got this home video shot by people who live in an apartment that overlooks 35W. They were on their balcony when they heard what happened. They grabbed their camera after hearing the boom when the bridge collapsed, and here's what they saw.
When our building started vibrating, we thought maybe it was an earthquake since we moved out from California, but we knew that didn't really happen here in Minnesota, so our next thought was maybe a giant plane flying by. We ran to the windows and just saw the cars falling into the river, basically.
What did that look like?
It was terrifying. It was just like something out of the movies. You know, you stand there outside your window and the bridge is buckling and the cars are sliding into the water, and then one of the semis exploded, and it was one of those situations where you kind of wish, I say, you were a superhero and you could go out and reach out and put your hands underneath the bridge, but all you could do is stand and watch kind of in terror, and these guys as well, watching everything happen.
So scary. What was it like for you guys? What do you remember from it?
But the first time I saw it, there was smoke, like really big smoke coming out from the ground, and then my auntie came out, and and my auntie and uncle came out, and they're like very terrified and saying, "What was that?"
What did you think, Sean?
Same thing as her.
Scary. How many, I know you weren't keeping count, but how many cars, trucks do you think plunged into the water?
Probably about a dozen from the north side were slipping in right away when the concrete became really steep. I'm not sure about from the south side, but miraculously in the middle, the cars stayed on the section of bridge, and people got out of their cars and were helping each other, and they were okay.
So you saw some people make it out okay. What was it like when you saw people walking away from it all?
Well, we just couldn't imagine the shock that they must have felt, you know. I mean, the cars apparently bounced, I mean, because the bridge dropped quite a bit, and then the cars bounced, and then people actually came out of it.
Now, people who didn't make it off the bridge, these are the stories that cause us to hold our breath and have that pit in your stomach, because we are learning that some of them spent their last few minutes reaching out to police officers who say they couldn't do anything more to save their lives. Chief Tim Dolan describes what his officers experienced on the bridge yesterday afternoon.
people that were pinned, people that were partly crushed, that were told emergency workers to say hello, say goodbye.
Now, Chief Dolan of the Minneapolis Police Department says the department owes it to the victims to recover each of the bodies. Those efforts ongoing.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the water levels on the Mississippi River at the 35W Bridge. There's a dam right there where the Corps of Engineers can control the water levels. Very important to the recovery effort, and Colleen Mahoney is live with more on that part of the story. Colleen?
The Mississippi River is running really slowly right now, and there are two reasons for this. One, it is summer, and we are in a drought. Now, that should be helping recovery efforts tonight, but as we've talked about so much this evening, the debris field is a problem. Tonight, we look at what the federal government is doing to help.
There are orange barriers across the Mississippi River at Lock and Dam number 1. Experts tell us that has happened only 3 times since the late 1950s. The U.S. Coast Guard made the call to shut down all traffic from here, past the recovery site, to Upper St. Anthony Falls Lock and Dam.
Right now our main focus is to recover any victims that are still in the water, assist the investigative agency with the investigation and removing parts of the bridge there, and again providing the security zone.
The Coast Guard has boats and teams cruising the channel today.
Right now the channel depth varies between 4 to 14 feet.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers usually keeps it at about 9 feet so barge traffic can move through. But today, it is all about the needs of recovery crews.
They have to do the investigation, take all the pictures, get everything all lined up, and then we're going to go ahead and lower the water levels. So they're going to see what else is underneath there and kind of get a plan of attack.
The Corps got the word from authorities about 11 today and dropped water levels 2 feet.
The Coast Guard telling us they do not know how long this section of river is going to be closed, but clearly the sheriff tonight making it clear it looks like it could be several days. Reporting live along the river, Colleen Mahoney, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thanks, Colleen. And all of the tragedy, a lot of heroes like this Minneapolis police officer that we've shined the light on in this video. He is 55-year-old Sergeant Ed Nelson, risking his life to save others. And Brad sat and talked to him today about this daring rescue. Brad?
Something to see, John. Sergeant Nelson was on the scene of the collapse within 3 minutes. He and 2 other officers among the first there immediately divided their duties and went straight to work.
It was utter chaos.
But chaos wouldn't scare this 25-year veteran away.
You're forced to make a decision, and do we stand back and watch, or do we take action?
He decided on action.
We found several survivors on the span that was actually in the river.
But how to get down to them?
I didn't want my gun belt to be an anchor, so we ditched the gun belts and slid down a beam. Had about a 4-foot span that we had to cross to get to another section.
Literally the open water and strong currents below, hanging onto beams less than a foot wide at 60-degree angles.
It was nothing but twisted metal, overhanging concrete. You could hear the bridge creaking, you could hear rivets popping, and you heard the people on the span that was actually in the water crying for help. You have to take a calculated risk.
He managed to get over to a group of young women screaming hysterically and tried to calm them down with a little joke.
I explained to them the fall was fine, that's not going to hurt you, it's a sudden stop at the end. But, you know, and they found that somewhat humorous, and it calmed them down.
He helped evacuate as many as 15 injured people, staying until the last one he could find was taken off in a boat, calling it simply his duty.
We did what we had to do.
Sergeant Nelson, like so many others, saying they've never experienced anything like this. But his training, he says, really kicked in here. In fact, the only thing he says he might have done a little differently, he took off his radio so it wouldn't weigh him down. But then, of course, he couldn't communicate with others. All in all, though, Police Chief Tim Dolan saying they did a superb job. Back to you guys.
Boy, do you think this is a man who is understating what he did out there? All right, let's go back up in the air with Bob McNeely live in Chopper 5. Bob?
Yeah, those guys are pretty good at that. They're everyday heroes, and it's just tragedies like this that people get to see, I tell you. You look back down at the scene right now, and you can see there's a little bit more activity. One of the boats is down there, and we've seen that since about, well, frankly, about 4:30, 5 o'clock this morning. There's always one boat, if you will, that's essentially keeping watch over the collapsed area. It's a Coast Guard cutter, a Coast Guard ship that's come in there and basically held the position until searchers can get in. But as you see, as we pull back a little bit, actual deck activity on board is pretty limited right now. We did see a dog over there earlier this evening that was going through some of the debris. But again, you heard it from Rich Danek, the sheriff. Again, if you will, if you look at all that metal and debris and whatnot, and it's just unimaginable that you'd even want to put someone in there to go look for human remains. It's a job they have to do, but clearly people can understand why you don't want to put people down in the water when they have the potential to be washed right into that area that you're looking at now. It's just nasty, brutally dangerous right now. I can tell you that throughout the course of the day, people from all across the United States have emailed me. I've talked to several media outlets across the country, and they're all expressing their concern for the people of the Twin Cities and their thoughts and prayers. I can tell you I got a call today and then an email from a contact in Canada, and he simply put that he wishes there was something he could do. He says, our thoughts and prayers are with you and the families on this most unfortunate day, this most unfortunate disaster that occurred in your great city. I wish there was something I could do. And that's sort of the feeling that we've gotten from people on the ground, the rescue people, the recovery crews, and people all across the United States. They just wish they could do something to make some of the pain go away, or at least retrieve the bodies that are presumed underneath there. John, Cindy?
Bob, thanks. Now, not far from the bridge in the command center, it's actually near the Stone Arch Bridge. That's where Mark Albert is, and Mark is our guy on the investigation end of all of this.
Specifically, the transportation investigation. We've heard what the NTSB, the Transportation Safety Board, has had to say. We, of course, have the Minnesota Department of Transportation very much involved in this. Mark?
And Cindy, they have been coming through here throughout the day. This is sort of like News Briefing Central here as the officials from the NTSB, from the State Department of Transportation, from the federal government, from the city, come here and give us the latest on the investigation. So let me share with you right now what we know to be the latest on this investigation. The governor coming here just a short while ago and acknowledging that there are going to be some hard questions, some tough questions relating to this specific bridge and the inspections that the state gave to it in the past couple of years. He mentioned that we will give a hard, tough look at this, that there were a lot of judgment calls mentioned, a lot of judgment calls made, and that they are all going to be reviewed. Now, he specifically ordered three things. The bridge you're looking at right now, live from Chopper 5, there are three other bridges across the state that have similar designs. Designed either at the end of World War II, beginning of the 60s, and they all have the similar structure. The governor has ordered immediate inspections for those three. Hopefully, the governor is saying those will be done within a matter of days, certainly within a week. Second, the governor has ordered an independent firm to conduct its own outside investigation into this bridge collapse. Yes, the NTSB is the lead federal agency conducting the investigation. The governor wants an independent investigation as well to make sure that this is thorough. And finally, the governor ordering an outside review of the state's inspection process. He wants to know if there's anything the state can do to make its process more rigorous and perhaps to see if changes are needed. The NTSB will be looking at that precise thing. Now, this particular bridge here over 35W has been inspected every year since 1993. Before that, it was inspected every other year, but state inspectors made that change back in 93, back 14 years ago, and since then it has been inspected every year. Some troubling things have come out of those inspections. Since 1990, we learned today, that bridge has been classified as structurally deficient. What that means is inspectors have noticed corrosion on some of the bearings and the steel around the joints of the bridge, and fatigue cracks that have been found on some of the approach spans. Those are the spans that are basically foundations are planted in the ground as they support the bridge that is going to go right over the water. The governor and the transportation officials saying here this afternoon that those details from those inspections are going to be critical as they review those.
This bridge was considered structurally deficient, and it was classified that way, as I mentioned earlier, for the reasons I mentioned, the bearing issue, the fact that we had fatigue in the approach spans, but it repaired it, and then also the corrosion. The recent inspections in 2005 and 2006, we found no evidence of additional cracking in the bridge or growth in the pre-existing cracks.
And that was reassuring to investigators that those cracks had not been spreading. Perhaps not reassuring to the rest of us who really don't know the technical side of this is that inspectors have actually found cracks in this bridge since it first opened back in 1967. Live in Minneapolis, Mark Albert, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thank you very much, Mark. A UPS driver whose truck fell off the bridge in the collapse told his story this morning with KQRS Morning Show. His name is Bill Wagner. He called from his hospital bed at Hennepin County Medical Center. Let's listen.
How are you, sir?
A little sore, you know.
What? Where?
Here's the deal. I was going across the bridge, you know, and I was heading south on 35.
Uh-huh.
And I was looking over. I was in the right lane. I was looking over at the falls, thinking, man, I hope this bridge don't collapse because I don't want to go down in the water.
Oh man!
And 2 seconds later, it did. All of a sudden, the bridge started shaking, and I was like, and it was just like that. It was just shaking really bad. The weird thing is I used to drive for Sarah Lee, or Tasty Bakery, and the guy I worked with, he went right ahead of me. I just waved to him, and he's the guy that burned up in the fire.
Oh, did he?
But yeah, I worked with him for about 5 years.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
And all of a sudden, you know, it was like, I was driving down the road, it started shaking like an earthquake, and next thing I know, I was looking straight ahead, and then I realized the part of the bridge that I was on was going down. And the school bus was, like, right ahead of me. And if you look at the school bus was on the flat part.
Yes.
And my truck, the bridge broke right behind it, and I veered right off head first off the side of the bridge.
He made it. He made it. That was the driver of that UPS truck you saw laying on its side. And he called into the KQRS morning team this morning. Now let's go out to Hennepin County Medical Center. Allison Triarci is covering a number of angles on this story. Now, Allison, you have some information about prayer services, people getting together to be together during this time of trouble.
That's right, John. They leave the Hennepin County Medical Center and walk over to a church, St. Olaf's Church in Minneapolis, another one in St. Paul. It's amazing how an impromptu invitation sent out at the last minute drew hundreds and hundreds of people to church this afternoon. You could cry to look at her, the pain in her face. We can only wonder what she's going through. And what's worse, there are so many others just like her.
He's missing. He hasn't been located.
Catherine Colbeck came to St. Olaf's service to say a prayer that her friend, a co-worker, would be found.
I just feel awful for the people's families who don't know where their loved ones are. I can't imagine that.
He would have been 30 this weekend, last heard from calling his wife on his way home near the bridge.
I don't know, it's there's a lot of emotions, you know, it's kind of a hard thing to put in words.
Right now, let's take a quiet moment and ask our God to bless us all in this place.
An impromptu prayer service resulted in a couple hundred people showing up.
It's just important to pray for them and hope everything works out.
Burdened, crying. Hopefully they left with a little comfort, a little hope. And of course, some good news. The 5 people who have been in critical condition are still hanging in there right here at the Hennepin County Medical Center. 12 people have gone home. Reporting live, Allison Triarci. Back to you, John and Cindy.
Thanks, Allison. The Twins will play their 4-game series against Cleveland this weekend at the Metrodome. Twins president Dave St. Peter said the team has been in regular contact with public safety officials since last night. Those discussions led to the decision to play last night's game, the decision to postpone the afternoon game today against the Royals. St. Peter says they were encouraged by various agencies to go ahead with the baseball series, to go ahead and play the Cleveland Indians this weekend. This was supposed to be a day to celebrate the groundbreaking of the Twins' new stadium. Baseball Commissioner Bud Selig was supposed to be here, but of course that was postponed along with the baseball game. Selig's spokesman says the commissioner is very aware of the tragedy.
You know, just in a couple of conversations we had both last night and today, you know, he's obviously very familiar with the area, having been there numerous times, and, you know, and was very aware of that bridge, and, you know, and just obviously all shocked and concerned, and, you know, and we're thinking about everyone there.
And that was Spud Selig's spokesman. Now, we have another big event in the Twin Cities. A lot of other people are thinking about it as well, and that includes the folks with the 3M Championship Golf Tournament in Blaine. The tournament, again, it will be played as scheduled, starting on Friday, finishing on Sunday. But additional funds raised from this tournament will be donated to the Red Cross, the Minnesota Red Cross, as they continue to support local efforts related to, of course, the bridge event of yesterday.
And usually about this time we talk to Rod Simons about sports, but we're not going to do that tonight because, Rod, you've been in the middle of this thing since about 24 hours ago, and you talked to another witness who saw a whole lot.
Saw him moments after we left the Target Center and rushed down to the scene. And as I arrived on the scene just off West River Parkway below the bridge, the first survivor of the collapse that I ran into was Gary Babineau. His face was bleeding. He had no shirt. He was shaking. He was clearly in shock. I just saw him this afternoon. He told me his family was the only thing on his mind as he was falling off the buckling bridge.
That's the first thing I thought about when I figured out the bridge was going down. That's the first thing that went through my mind. Oh my God, I have a baby coming in 2 weeks. You know, I can't die. Please don't let me die. It was like a prayer was just going through my mind. God, you know, I don't want to die. You know, just. Ugh.
Babineau is in the intense spotlight because he was one who not only survived in his demolished rig, but he then got out to rescue kids from this bus. Some 60 people were coming back from the Bunker Beach Water Park when they were caught in the collapse.
When I saw the school bus, it was just, I got to get to those kids, you know. I know that there's going to be other people, and we all need to come together and we need to help these kids. We need to get them out of there.
And he did that. But as quickly as Babineau rushed to help rescue those on the bus, his mind was racing with thoughts of his pregnant fiancée, Liz. And as he stands as close as they'll let us get to one of the collapsed spans, the whole scene is as vivid as it was just after 6 Wednesday night.
Hearing the car screeching down the incline and falling off right next to me, and then hearing the screaming kids in the bus, that's, you know, I had an angel looking down on me, you know. 2 seconds later, and, you know, I would have been in the water, or I would have been, you know, someone was looking over me.
It's a great story. I asked Gary what he and his fiancée Liz were going to name their newborn. If it's a boy or girl, they don't know yet. Most likely it will not be a name derived from his good fortune getting out of this accident. If it's a girl, it's Lucy. If it's a boy, it's James or Thomas. Tonight, he is just happy to be a dad.
Yep.
That is wonderful.
Great stuff.
And that gives us a little bit of a nice note because we have to go into stories like these, the 4 people that we know have died.
The 4 confirmed victims now. We're learning more about them bit by bit, piece by piece. Here is a picture of a man killed in the bridge collapse. His name, Patrick Holmes, 36 years old. He lived in Mounds View. His wife, Jennifer, tells us he was a great husband and father to their 6-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter.
Another victim, 60-year-old Sherry Engebretson of Shoreview. Earlier, we talked to her husband and her daughter as they waited for word. And unfortunately, the word that they received was what they had hoped desperately not to receive. Also, the other victims that we know have been identified are Timeo Trinidad Mania, 29 years old from Minneapolis, and Julia Blackhawk, 32 years old from Savage.
Early today, we sent Tim Chernow out to talk to people who simply had to be there in some way or shape or form, just to see what happened. And, Tim, it really became almost a community of folks down there who had to be with someone, at least for a while today.
It was an emotional outpouring, very typical of the people of Minnesota, as we are coming to find out. We met Judy Hunt, who came down to the Stone River Bridge with her family, with her 2 sons, Riley, 5 years old, and Morgan, 9 years old, who you're about to meet. She said today was history, and she wanted to bring her children down to see it. And what's interesting is, as we've been watching the coverage all day long, we've been hearing from adults who can learn about the news and understand. But if you think about it, families across the state of Minnesota go back and forth across bridges with kids in the back seats of the minivan, and they are hearing the news. This story you're about to hear is the perspective through the eyes of a child.
Yeah, it's kind of somber. It's sad. Think about all the people that were lost.
Tell me why you wanted to see the bridge.
Because I wanted to see if it was bent.
You know what happened at the bridge yesterday? Is the bridge bent?
It looks bent.
Is it sad, Riley? Is it a sad thing?
Yeah.
Tell me why it's sad, Riley.
Because the people might fall in the water.
When you see something like this and all the grown-ups running around and you see that bridge, what does that make you think about?
Makes me feel bad.
Tell me why.
because, like, all the people who got stuck in the cars and the fire, it's really sad.
And it certainly is. As you drive across the bridge with your children, you may want to think that they are hearing the news, and you may want to take a moment to try to explain to them what's happening here behind me. Back to you in the studio.
Good thoughts. Thanks, Tim.
Now, we have had some brilliantly clear skies over all of this. Kind of a strange echo, as Charlie Gibson pointed out, of 9/11, also another brilliant, clear day.
So true. You know, and today at least there wasn't anything from Mother Nature to hinder the recovery efforts that have been going on. Visible satellite confirming clear skies, high pressure and control, and brilliant sunshine on this kind of somber day across the Twin Cities. SkyMax 5 also confirming that not any rain is in our midst. Although I did want to mention that we got an update today, this afternoon, from the National Weather Service. The extent of the drought, the severity of the drought has actually expanded. Coming up tonight at 10, I'll show you the latest map for that. Meanwhile, temperatures on WeatherBug currently showing 80s. It's been a nice day. Beautiful, less humid, comfortable. 86 Blaine, 84 St. Paul, 86 in Apple Valley, and officially out at the airport. We did make it to a high of 89 degrees. Now we're to 87 with a wind out of the northwest at 13 miles per hour. Those dew points are down in the 40s. It is extremely comfortable air. Up north, Big Fork, Bemidji, Detroit Lakes, all in the 70s. It's in the 80s farther into south and central sections of our state. Here's where we're headed. We've got high pressure and control and warm weather for right now. A weak little reinforcing front's going to come through dry overnight tonight and into the first part of tomorrow. High pressure, dry weather, and more sunshine on the way. A big change, though, by Saturday. Here's an area of low pressure. It's forming right now near Wyoming, and what it's going to do is trek from west to east. The exact path still unknown, but it does appear the Twin Cities area, western Minnesota, southern Minnesota have a shot of seeing perhaps an inch or more of widespread rain. Here's the way things look on Raincast. We're starting you looking through the day on Saturday, and you'll notice a swath of heavy precipitation, which should help things in the drought category. Hopefully it will not hinder things as far as the continuation of our recovery efforts. Overnight down to 60 degrees for tomorrow, 87 your high. A quick look at your 7-day forecast will reveal that temperatures may be a little cooler on Saturday as a result of the rain that I'm expecting, and then we warm right back up into summer territory as we head into next week.
All right, well, thanks for joining us here, giving us the weather update, because life still has to go on.
And we'll bring Leah McLean back into our coverage right now, and she'll tell us what she sees. She's been live near the bridge for the last few hours, talking to a lot of people from different walks, people looking onto the scene, and also folks who live in that apartment building behind you who watched it from above, unfortunately.
John, there are so many interesting stories from people out here, and people who have been coming up and telling us they've been looking for their lost loved ones. We spoke to a man who lives in a building right over here behind us, and he was saying how he heard this collapse. He said he'd never heard anything like it in his entire life. And John and Cindy, even for me, I've had family and friends calling from other states and wondering, now, you weren't on that bridge, were you? And I think there are a lot of people in the state who are hearing that exact same question from their friends and their loved ones. Everybody just wanting to make sure they're not among the missing, the injured, or those even feared dead as well. And so many stories. I want to give you one more look as we've still got the full sunlight, but this bridge, it's still such an incredible scene to see from this angle. You think you drive down this road, you keep going, and to see that it just stops at the end there. And that is the scene tonight as we look at it from up above on our vantage point here. A lot of the families still in this hotel where we are, waiting for word, dealing with the Red Cross right now, and hoping upon hope that they may get good news versus the bad news that many people fear they will get before this day is over, before this week is over. And we will continue to stay here and get more of their stories and more information on anything else that happens here. For now, John and Cindy, back into you.
Okay, Leah, thanks. We'll see you later on. Quick reminder about the change in the detour around the bridge collapse. The right lane of 35W southbound is now open up to Stinson Avenue. Traffic on 35W northbound still routed to Interstate 94, then to 280. 280 has been turned into a temporary freeway. Stoplights have been turned off. What that means, though, is County Road B, Broadway Street Northeast, and Roselawn Avenue are closed at Highway 280.
At this point, we have learned the names of 4 of the victims. We are going to show you now a picture of 2 of those victims. We have identified Patrick Holmes. It has been identified for as one of the bridge victims. He's 36 years old. He lived in Mounds View. His wife, Jennifer, tells us He was a great husband. He was a great father to their 6-year-old son and their 4-year-old daughter.
60-year-old Sherry Engebretson of Shoreview. Earlier we talked to her husband and daughter. They waited for word, hoping that she might turn up in a hospital injured. She did not. She was killed in the collapse. Artemio Trinidad Mena from Mexico, the father of 4, 3 of the kids still in Mexico. His wife is here in Minneapolis. His family now is trying to raise money to bring his body back to Mexico for proper burial in his homeland.
As we continue to conclude our news coverage right now, we want to go back up to the sky with Bob McNaney. Bob?
Obviously, look down on the middle portion of the collapse, and you know, Chris Keating was saying earlier down near the kind of the launch site for the search crews, the scuba crews, that they were hoping to get in there one more time tonight before the sun goes down. We have not seen much activity along the river, and I would guess we got about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half left before they lose the sunlight, and they're clearly not going to go in there tonight after dark. As you look down, what you can expect basically this evening is the lights in the area to illuminate that bridge, just to kind of keep watch over it. That boat that you saw, it will be patrolling no doubt tonight, even if the divers aren't in the water, and it's basically hold the perimeter, if you will, to maintain everything that's in place. Again, not only to preserve the dignity of those who are trapped under there, and also to protect the integrity of the investigation and any evidence that basically that the NTSB will have. Obviously, this is probably one of our last looks for today from up here in Chopper 5, but we obviously will have more tonight at 10 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Bob. Once again, we have learned the names of the victims: Julia Blackhawk, 32 years old, from Savage; Patrick Holmes from Mounds View, 36; Artemio Trinidad Mena, 29-year-old from Minneapolis; and Sherry Engebretson, a 60-year-old from Shoreview. Our coverage will be continuing tonight on 5 Eyewitness News at 10.
There's plenty of information for you, too, at KSTP.com, including information about the detours we've been telling you about. If you have pictures, still pictures or video of what happened out there, we would like to see them. In fact, the NTSB would like to see them, too, and we'll give you that number later on in our newscast on 5 Eyewitness News at 10, because the NTSB is looking for video evidence of what happened with the 35W bridge. For now, we have 4 people dead, 79 hurt, up to 30 people missing. As far as a recovery effort today, it was brief. It was unsuccessful, though Hennepin County divers did get into the river. They searched one area where they thought there were 4 vehicles. They found 2 vehicles, but no victims. They don't know what happened to the victims that was in one of the cars, but they were not in the river. So the recovery effort will not continue tonight, we don't think, because, of course, darkness sets in a couple of hours.
And the one bright spot, the note of optimism that was voiced today, was from federal transportation safety officials who say they have video of the scene of the collapse. That, combined with a computer program, they say is going to be like a black box for them, like the airplane black box, will give them some information, and hopefully as soon as we can bring that information on to you. Of course, this is going to be a very long, involved process, but a spot of optimism that the investigation is moving as forward as well as they could have hoped.
And we want to leave you now with some images and sounds that we've been gathering all day. It's being called one of the most tragic days in Minneapolis history, in the history of the Twin Cities. More coming up at 10. Good night.
Good night.
I lost my mom. I don't know. This is the hardest thing ever.
She's a fighter. My wife's a fighter.
We in the federal government must respond. And respond robustly to help the people there.
There's a car on fire right there. It's crushed.
I swear I saw people in the air.
Because there wasn't anything you could do.
This is obviously a horrific incident that takes your breath away and sinks your heart. In the horror of this incident, there is a silver lining, and that shines through, and that is the goodness of Minnesotans.